Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. A jet manufacturer plans to bring more than 14,000 jobs to North Carolina over the next 10 years. That's the biggest ever job commitment in our state. WRAL's Jack Hagel has been covering the story and joins me with what we know about JetZero's planned facility at the Greensboro airport. Jack, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
So, okay, let's start here. Who is JetZero? What is this company? And what is the plane that they're planning to build? Because they haven't done it yet.
So JetZero is a California company. They're about 5 years old, and they're working on what's called a blended wing design or an all-wing design. If you're familiar with the stealth bomber, it's sort of like this very futuristic-looking V-type plane, and they want to do it for commercial purposes. And so what's interesting about the plane is that it is extremely fuel efficient. They say that it will save, it'll use about 50% less fuel on your typical flight and reduce emissions too. Now, the emissions is cool and all that, and that's great for the environment, but the airlines are really interested in this because of the cost savings. Mm-hmm. Jet fuel accounts for about 25% of the operating costs of airlines. And as fuel prices go up, that eats into their profit. Could we see lower ticket prices? Maybe. I don't think we will. But what it does is if you can buy a plane that's more efficient and use less fuel, it's gonna be more profitable for you. And so what this company wants to do is make these planes. They've got a lot of commitment from folks, and if they can pull it off, it could really change things.
Okay.
In the aviation field.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that would be a very different, looking at those models that we saw on Thursday, the very different looking plane if it was used for passenger planes. Why did they decide to choose North Carolina, specifically Greensboro, for this manufacturing plant?
Well, when any company looks for a place to do business, they look at a few things. They look at the workforce and they look at land. You know, at the end of the day, it's going to cost a lot of money to operate somewhere. You need land. Mm-hmm. Greensboro has a lot of land around its airport. And it also, North Carolina has a lot of people who work here and a lot of people who want to work here, want to move here because it's relatively inexpensive. The other thing is that, the community colleges in this state, but particularly in Greensboro, they're geared towards aviation, aerospace type jobs. And that's because we have a number of aerospace and aviation companies that have sort of gathered around the airport there. In, I guess it was 2007, Honda Aviation started building I guess they moved their headquarters there and they started building Honda Jet. And actually, they'd started building that even before they announced their headquarters there. Mm-hmm. Boom Supersonic, which is another jet maker, they're looking to build, this sort of new wave of supersonic planes, and they're also building there. Those companies have thousands of employees, and together, their workforces won't even come close to the number of people that JetZero wants to hire. They want to hire, 14,500 people there. Another thing is also incentives. The state was willing to give them an incentives package that would help them kind of grow here. They were offering, I think, in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion in state incentives to grow here, to build their factory here, to hire the people here. And so companies look at all of those things and they say, okay, well, this seems like a good fit for us. But Greensboro in particular, just because they've built that cluster of companies and the community colleges, those are really big things. Right,
yeah. And I will say, as someone who used to work in the Greensboro market, I was there when Boom Supersonic announced that they were coming, and Guilford Tech, I think, announced that they were going to be doing some partnerships and stuff. If you've ever been to PTI, and I'm sure most people probably around here fly out of RDU, I'll just tell you, it's a very small airport if you're just going through the terminal, probably to Charlotte, because that's most of the flights. But the land around the airport, as you said, there's a lot of open space around there, and they were working on, I think a new runway and things like that related to Boom Supersonic. So clearly they were future-minded with attracting other companies here.
And there's also a lot of roads there, too.
Yeah, there's the interstate.
It's a tangle of really useful roads for any company. They're also in the middle of the state and between two big international airports. So, I think that kind of factors in pretty well. You're not going to have the kind of air traffic that you might have in Charlotte or in the Triangle. And also, again, land costs. It's going to cost you a lot more to buy the land near RDU, for instance,
Right.
Or near Charlotte, where you're competing with home builders, you're competing with, government agencies want to build schools and so forth. And so it just sort of seems to be a really good fit if you're looking for a place to build planes. It's right across the street. So if you want to build planes and there's land there, that's a pretty good place to do it.
Exactly. And now, what does JetZero say about these 14,500 jobs? Are those all going to be there in Greensboro, or kind of, as you said, because of this like strategic location in the center of the state, could that footprint extend out?
Well, so the terms of the jobs grant is that they just have to be in the state.
Okay.
I think they intend to have most of them at this factory. And the kinds of jobs really run the gamut. I mean, if you can think of anything that goes into a plane, there's probably going to be someone there either designing it, assembling it, or thinking it through as this company tries to get these planes in the air. So we're talking about engineers, aerospace and aeronautical engineers. We're talking about it could be a materials engineer, someone who's designing the material that's actually going to make up the skin of the plane. Supply chain managers, just people who are going to turn screws and piece these things together.
All right, let's take a quick break right there, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what is next from here. Jack, I got to tell you, this does feel a little bit like deja vu when you think about the different economic development stories that have been going on in the Triad, where this is going to be happening, and also here in the Triangle. Over there in Greensboro, that as we've talked about, Boom Supersonic just broke ground at PTI this year. We also know, again, also in Guilford County, Toyota's battery plant is getting closer to opening. But then on the other side of that coin, closer here to the Triangle, Apple, VinFast, they've seen big delays. So it feels like we've seen varying degrees of success with these big companies getting these incentives from the state to come here. So how confident are the state leaders that you talk to that JetZero is going to hold up its end of the bargain here?
Well, with any investment, there's always a little bit of risk. And, I think the state spent, and I know that they spent a lot of time looking at the company's balance sheet, talking with executives, talking to suppliers, talking to partners, talking to companies that really want these airplanes. They spoke with the federal government. The federal government has given this company hundreds of millions of dollars because they want to see this thing developed, because they may have some uses for it. So from what I gather in talking to state officials, they spent an awful lot of time really digging into this company, and they think it'll be successful. Now, of course, there's always varying degrees of success, and that it could be economic. But I think the issues that have sort of dealt with other companies, oftentimes it's a very company specific. Sometimes there's a merger, and the acquiring company says, okay, well, we don't want that unit anymore, and maybe you're not hiring as many people as you once promised the state you might. Or maybe it's just, this one industry has hit hard times, and while others are flourishing, and maybe they don't hire as much. Or, in the case during the pandemic, sometimes, what was, we're going to have 500 people here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Well, now those people are working all over the state or all over the country, and they're not able to hire or retain those jobs here in the state. So oftentimes when we see economic development deals fall apart, it's oftentimes very company to company. So in terms of just how confident state leaders are, though, it's always a gamble. And again, this is a 5-year-old company, and they don't have a plane in the air yet.
Right.
They have a lot of confidence in the engineering, and the state thinks that they'll get up in the air, and they hope they will. So we'll see. Now, one thing that's probably worth mentioning here is that the state doesn't just hand over money to these organizations. They make sure that the companies are hiring people and spending the money that they say they'll spend. So if a company's not delivering on hiring, or maybe they're not building the factory by the time they say they will, the state's isn't just going to give them money. And these incentives are oftentimes paid out over a number of years. In this case, it's going to be over 37 years. So you got to hit this target every year. And then after a period of time, they have to retain a number of jobs. And if they don't, then the state isn't going to pay them out. Now, that's happened a lot recently where the state has canceled some incentives deals for companies that just weren't hitting the benchmarks. Oftentimes, the companies say, hey, listen, we're changing course here. We're not going to be able to. Could you just please cancel it for us? So, I think companies go into these things with the best intentions, but it's not a handout, and we're not giving. I think the state's not giving money to companies unless they're actually gonna meet it. Now, there are some things that the state will spend on that may actually benefit the broader economy. So sometimes they'll put a lot of money into, the community colleges, for instance, and maybe that company goes away, but maybe those training programs could help fuel another company.
Well, as we see with Gopher Tech and this situation, that infrastructure that was already starting to be laid for Boom, regardless of how that turns out, now has helped with this.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that's what I'm hearing from the state. It's also what I'm hearing from site selection experts. Anytime we hear of a company maybe canceling plans or whatever, they're always saying big deal, because there's 4 or 5 other companies that are lining up to take that piece of property or to open up shop there. So I feel like I think North Carolina has a little bit of insurance in what it has to offer in terms of its cost of doing business and those sorts of things. Those are the kinds of things that companies really look for when they're looking for a place. And so I think North Carolina has shown that it can do it's pretty successful in attracting businesses here. And so I think that would be, that's something that we always watch for when a company sort of drops out of a site.
So what is going to be next in this process as far as we know?
Well, the company has to start building, and they're going to try to do that next year. In the meantime, they're going to be looking for people to hire. It's going to take a really long time to hire that many people, and they may not need them right away. I know that the head of the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce mentioned in remarks today that this is a 10, 15, 20-year process to build up a factory that big. Just kind of for scope, 14,500 people is more than like the population of Smithfield or Rollsville. And actually, I looked this up, twice the size of Kitty Hawk, which is where the Wright brothers launched their first successful airplane flight. So it's a really, really, really big project, and it's going to take some time. And I asked the Commerce Secretary, Lee Lilly, about that. That's how do you find that many people?
Right.
Not just people who want to work there, number one, people who are qualified to work there. There just aren't that many. This number of jobs alone it's like one job for every unemployed person in Greensboro.
Wow.
And so they're going to have to recruit maybe people from other states, and a lot of people want to move to North Carolina, so that may be part of it. But they're also going to have to develop that workforce, and that's where the community colleges and workforce development come in. So that's a big part of this. They also have to get an airplane in the air. And they want to have that happen by 2027, have what's called a demonstrator up in the air. And they really want to have this thing in commercial service by 2030. The state seems to think that they're on a trajectory to make that work. And so we're just going to have to see if it happens.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jack. As you said, North Carolina, Kitty Hawk. That's first in flight. See if we're part of the future of flight here. Thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.